From the book The Israel of God, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow by Robertson. Chapter 1, page 7. The land and the experience of God's people under the Old Covenant. Land began with paradise, but the paradisical nature of land was lost in the fall. Sinful humanity was expelled from this land of blessing. But the idea of paradise was renewed in the promise of land made by God in his covenant to redeem a people from his fallen condition. As Adam and Eve had known God's blessing in Eden, so God would bless his people in a new land. This idea of restoration to paradise provides the proper biblical context for understanding God's promise to give land to Abraham, Genesis 12:1. This promise to the patriarch became the basis for all subsequent understanding of the role of the land in the unfolding in the history of redemption. The divine promise was restated to Moses in terms of a land flowing with milk and honey. As the significance of this land was revealed to Moses, three striking concepts emerged. First, that the land belongs to the Lord of the covenant. Second, that all blessings flow from the land come ultimately from the hand of the Lord. And third, that this land is uniquely holy. Yet with all the emphasis on the distinctiveness of this land in comparison with all other lands, the reason for its selection must not be overlooked. From the beginning it was declared that God had committed himself in covenant oath to Abraham, not that the patriarch might indulge himself with God's blessings, but that Abraham would be a blessing for the purpose of blessing to all the nations of the world. As a narrow land bridge connecting the continents of Africa, Europe, and Asia, this place and no other was rightly situated for the extension of God's covenantal blessings to the entire world. It was for this reason that the prophet Ezekiel later declared that God's people were situated at the center of the earth, and that Jerusalem was in the center of the nations. The holiness of the land is inescapably related to the fact that the holy God dwelt there. As has been stated, because Yahweh was near to it, his own holiness radiated throughout its boundaries. It is not that the land itself possessed some special sacredness in and of itself. As a matter of fact, the phrase Holy Land apparently is used only twice in the whole of Scripture. In each case, the word land must be supplied as inference. Psalm 78:54 and Zechariah 2:12. In other words, the holiness of the land is derived from the presence of the holy God. But once his person has been removed, as is implied with the withdrawal of the Shekinah in the days before the captivity of Jerusalem, the land is no longer holy and becomes subject to human devastation. Even the ground around a bush in the desert becomes holy when the Lord manifests his presence in that place. Exodus 3:5. Because of the presence of the Lord, Moses must remove his shoes so that he will not defile the ground that has become holy. Yet this land was in Sinai, not Israel. In a similar way, Israel is charged not to defile the land, for I dwell in the midst of my people Israel. Yet the holiness of the Lord so penetrates the land that it may be said that it is proactive in maintaining its own sacredness. Because of the pollutions of the Canaanites, the land vomited them out from its midst. Leviticus 18:25. In a similar way, Israel must be careful to keep all the Lord's commandments, or the land will vomit them out. Leviticus 18:28 and 20:22. So it was enough that a tree was used for the execution of the innocent Son of God. Heaven darkened at that total reversal of the intended order of creation. If his body had been allowed to remain on the tree beyond the time allotted by the law of God, no one could have predicted the consequences. But his prompt removal symbolized the prospect that peace could be restored between an offended God and an offended creation. The land functioned in significant ways by the appointment of God in accordance with the covenant mediated through Abraham and Moses. In idyllic terms, it was described as a land flowing with milk and honey. This description of the promised land intentionally reflected the nature of paradise. Yet the real condition of the land as experienced by Israel was quite different, as can be seen from an old Jewish fable. According to the legend, God at creation commissioned 2 storks to gather stones all over the face of the earth. These stones were divided into 2 bags, one for each stork. But the bag being carried by one stork broke over the land of the Bible. As a consequence, half of the stones of the world are located in Israel. It is indeed a glorious land, a land with great diversity and beauty, but many other parts of the world are much more fertile, and lack all the stones found so abundantly in this land. Throughout its history, Israel's experience with the land had the effect of placing the promise of it in the category of an old covenant shadow that would have to wait for the arrival of the new covenant realities for its fulfillment. In the time of David and Solomon, The full extent of the land was described as stretching from the Tigris-Euphrates River to the border of Egypt. 1 Kings 4:21. In this restored paradise of the kingdom, every man was sit under his own vine and fig tree, yet from the beginning the actual experience of the people was quite different. From Solomon's day onward, the people experienced oppression rather than paradise, which had the effect of placing the promise firmly within the category of an old covenant shadow that would have to wait for the arrival of new covenant realities for its fulfillment. The possession of the land under the old covenant was not an end in itself, but fit instead among the shadows, types, and prophecies that were characteristic of the old covenant in its presentation of redemptive truth. Just as the tabernacle was never intended to be a settled item in the plan of redemption and to be rebuilt at a later future fulfillment, but instead was to point to Christ's tabernacling among his people, 1 John 1:14. And just as the sacrificial system could never atone for sins, but can only foreshadow the offering of the Son of God, so in a similar manner Abraham received the promise of the land, but never experienced the blessing of its full possession. In this way, the patriarch learned to look forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Because of the promise that was set before them, the patriarchs never returned to the land of Ur, since they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. As a consequence, even the denial of the realization of the promise to the patriarchs served the purposes of God by forcing them to look beyond their present experience to the future reality in their day. According to one analysis, the patriarchs were looking forward not so much to the day when their descendants would inherit the physical land as to the day when they themselves would inherit the heavenly country, which the physical land signified. They saw through the promise of the land, looking beyond it to a deeper spiritual reality. The promise concerning the land, whilst real and valid in its own terms, pointed typologically to something greater.